Carling's Marsh, some called it, but more often it was known by the name of Mive. Strange name that, Mive, and it was a strange place. 5 wild, desolate miles of thick water, green masses of some kind of kelp, and violent vegetable growth. To the east the cypress trees swelled more into prominence, and the district was vaguely designated by the villagers as Flan. Again a strange name, and again I offer no explanation. A sense of depression, of isolation, perhaps, which threatened to crash any buoyancy of feeling possessed by the most hardened traveller, seemed to emanate from this lonely wasteland. Was it any wonder that its observers always told of seeing it at night, before a storm, or in the spent afternoon of a dark and frowning day? And even if they had wandered upon it, say on a bright morning in June, the impression probably would have been the same, for the sun glittering upon the surface of the olive water would have lost its brilliance and become absorbed in the roily depths below. However, the presence of this huge marsh would have interested no one, had not the east road skirted for a dismal quarter-mile its melancholy shore. The east road, avoided, being frequently impassable because of high water, was a roundabout connection between the little towns of Twellen and Lamar. The road seemed to have been irresistibly drawn toward the Mive, for it cut a huge half-moon across the country for seemingly no reason at all. But this arc led through a wilderness of an entirely different aspect from the land surrounding the other trails. Like the rest, it started among the hills, climbed the hills, and rambled down the hills, but after passing Echo Lake, that lowering tarn locked in a deep ravine, it struggled up a last hillock and swept down upon a large flat. And as one proceeded, the flat steadily sank lower. It forgot the hills, and the ground, already damp, became sodden and quivering under the feet. And then, looming up almost suddenly, Mive, a morass, at first a bog, then a jungle of growth repulsive in its over-luxuriance, and finally a sea of kelp, an inland sargasso. Just why I had chosen the east road for a long walk into the country I don't really know. In fact, my reason for taking such a hike at all was rather vague. The day was certainly anything but ideal, a raw wind whipping in from the south, and a leaden sky typical of early September lent anything but an inviting aspect to those rolling Rentharpian hills. But walk I did, starting out briskly as the inexperienced all do, and gradually slowing down until 4 o'clock found me plodding almost mechanically along the flat. I dare say every passer-by, no matter how many times he frequented the road, always stopped at exactly the same spot I did, and suffered the same feeling of awe and depression that came upon me as my eyes fell upon that wild marsh. But instead of hurrying on, instead of quickening my steps in search of the hills again, I for some unaccountable reason left the trail and plunged through oozing fungi to the water's very edge. A wave of warm, humid air, heavy with the odour of growth, swept over me as though I had suddenly opened the door of some monstrous hothouse. Great masses of vines with fat, creeping tendrils hung from the cypress trees. Razor-edged reeds, marsh grass, long waving cat-tails, swamp vegetation of 1,000 kinds flourished here with luxuriant abundance. I went on along the shore. The water lapped steadily the sodden earth at my feet, oily-looking water, grim-looking, reflecting a sullen and overcast sky. There was something fascinating in it all, and while I am not one of those adventurous souls who revel in the unusual, I had no thought of turning back to the road, but plodded through the soggy, clinging soil, and over rotting logs as though hurrying towards some destination. The very contrast, the voluptuousness of all the growth seemed some mighty lure, and I came to a halt only when gasping for breath from exertion. For perhaps half an hour I stumbled forward at intervals, and then from the increasing number of cypress trees I saw that I was approaching the district known as the Flan. A large lagoon lay there, stagnant, dark, and entangled among the ripgrass and reeds that rasped against each other in a dry, unpleasant manner, like some sleeper constantly clearing his throat. All the while I had been wondering over the absolute absence of all animate life. With its dank air, its dark appeal, and its wildness, the Eden recesses of the Mive presented a glorious place for all forms of swamp life. And yet, not a snake, not a toad, not an insect had I seen. It was strange, and I looked curiously about me as I walked. And then, as if in contradiction to my thoughts, it fluttered before me. With a gasp of amazement I found myself staring at an enormous ebony black butterfly. Its jet colouring was magnificent, its proportions startling, for from wing-tip to wing-tip it measured fully 15 inches. It approached me slowly, and as it did I saw that I was wrong in my classification. It was not a butterfly, neither was it a moth, nor did it seem to belong to the order of the Lepidoptera at all. As large as a bird, its great body came into prominence over the wings, disclosing a huge proboscis, ugly and repulsive. I suppose it was instinctively that I stretched out my hand to catch the thing as it suddenly drew nearer. My fingers closed over it, but with a frightened whir it tore away, darted high in the air, and fluttered proudly into the undergrowth. It was then that I became aware that the first 2 fingers and a part of my palm were lightly coated with a powdery substance that had rubbed off the delicate membrane of the insect's wings. The perspiration of my hand was fast changing this powder into a sticky, bluish substance, and I noticed that this gave off a delightfully sweet odour. The odour grew heavier. It seemed to fill the air, to crowd my lungs, to create an irresistible desire to taste it. I sat down on a log. I tried to fight it off, but like a blanket it enveloped me, and the desire became irresistible. At length I could stand it no longer, and I slowly brought my fingers to my lips. A horribly bitter taste which momentarily paralyzed my entire mouth and throat was the result. It ended in a long coughing spell. Disgusted at my lack of willpower, I turned and began to retrace my steps toward the road. A feeling of nausea and of sluggishness began to steal over me, and I quickened my pace. But at the same time I kept watch for a reappearance of that strange butterfly. No sound now save the washing of the heavy water against the reeds, and the sucking noise of my steps. I had gone farther than I realized, and I cursed the foolish whim that had sent me here. As for the butterfly, whom could I make believe the truth of its size or even of its existence? I had nothing for proof, and I stopped suddenly. A peculiar formation of vines had attracted my attention, and yet not vines either. The thing was oval, about 5 feet in length, and appeared to be many weavings or coils of some kind of hemp. It lay fastened securely in a lower crotch of a cypress. One end was open, and the whole thing was a greyish colour like a cocoon. A shudder of horror swept over me. With a cocoon as large as this, the size of the butterfly would be enormous. In a flash I saw the reason for the absence of all other life in the Mive. These butterflies, developed as they were to such proportions, must have evolved into some strange order and become carnivorous. The 15-inch butterfly which had so startled me before faded into insignificance in the presence of this cocoon. I seized a huge stick for defence and hurried on toward the road. A low muttering of thunder from somewhere off to the west added to my discomfort. Black, threatening clouds, harbingers of an oncoming storm, were racing in from the horizon. The gloom blurred into a darkness, and I picked my way forward along the shore with more and more difficulty. Suddenly the mutterings stopped, and there came that expectant, sultry silence that precedes the breaking of a storm. But no storm came. The clouds all moved slowly, lava-like toward a central formation directly above me, and there they stopped, became utterly motionless, engraved upon the sky. There was something ominous about that monstrous cloud bank, and in spite of the growing feeling of nausea, I watched it pass through a series of strange colour metamorphoses, from a black to a greenish black, and from a decided green to a yellow, and from a yellow to a blinding, glaring red. And then as I looked, those clouds gradually opened. A ray of light pierced through as the aperture enlarged, disclosing an enormous vault-shaped cavern cut through the stratus. The whole vision seemed to move nearer, as though magnified 1,000 times. And then towers, domes, streets and walls took form, and these coagulated into a city painted stereoscopically in the sky. I forgot everything, and lost myself in the weird panorama above me. Crowds of men clothed in armour with high helmets were hurrying past in an endless procession. Regiment upon regiment of marching humanity were retreating as if from some enemy. And then it came, a swarm of butterflies, enormous, ebony black, carnivorous butterflies, approaching a doomed city. They met, the men and that strange form of life. But the defensive army in the gilded city seemed to be swallowed up. Again a picture took form, but this time a design, gigantic, magnificent. There, with its black wings outspread, was the butterfly I had sought to catch. The whole sky was covered by its massive form. It disappeared. The thunder mutterings now burst forth without warning in unrestrained fury. The clouds raced back again, erasing outline and detail, and there was only the gloom of a brooding, overcast sky. I turned and plunged through the underbrush. Vines and creepers lashed at my face. Knife reeds and swamp grass penetrated my clothing. Streaked lightning of blinding brilliance. Thunder belched from the sky. A wind sprang up, and the reeds and long grasses undulated before it like 1,000 writhing serpents. The sullen water of the Mive was black now, and racing in toward the shore in waves, and the thunder above swelled into crescendo. Suddenly I threw myself upon the oozing ground, and wormed my way deep into the undergrowth. A moment later the giant butterfly raced out of the storm toward me. I could see its sword-like proboscis, its repulsive body, and I could hear its sucking inhalation of breath. A thing of evil it was, transnormal, a hybrid growth from a pollutinous place of rot and over-luxuriant vegetation. But I was well hidden in the reeds. The monster passed on unseeing. In a flash I was up and lunging on again. The crashing reverberations of the storm seemed to pound against me as if trying to hold me back. 100 times I thought I heard that terrible flapping of wings behind me, but at last the road. Without slackening speed I ran on, away from the Mive, across the quivering flat, and on to the hills. At length exhaustion swept over me, and I fell gasping to the ground. It seemed hours that I lay there, motionless, unheeding the driving rain on my back. What had happened to me? And then I remembered. The 15-inch butterfly which had so startled me near the district of the Flan. I had tried to catch the thing, and it had escaped, leaving in my hand only a powderish substance that I had vainly brought to my lips. What had happened after that? a feeling of nausea had set in, like the immediate effects of a powerful drug. A strange insect of an unknown order, a butterfly and yet not a butterfly. Who knows what internal effect that powder would have on one? Had I been wandering in a delirium, caused by that powder from the insect's wings? And if so, where did delirium fade into reality? The vision in the sky, a vagary of a poisoned brain, perhaps. But the monstrosity which had pursued me, and the telltale cocoon? I looked back. There it lay, far below me, vague and indistinct in the deepening gloom, the black outlines of the cypress trees writhing in the night wind, silent, brooding, mysterious. The Mive.